Gonna strive to get through this without crying, but no promises. This is a piece that I wrote and have been considering as a part of my grief journey of healing from the death of my third son, Philip. So this is what I wrote. It's titled "The Accidental Amputation of My Soul, Recovery, Healing, and the Vitality of Music and Tears." Crying and driving don't coexist well, but there is something beautiful about the privacy of our own vehicle that gives us freedom to feel the depth of every emotion: hope, sorrow, despair, and even the pain of apathy. Driving a route I take almost every day of the school year, from my kids' school to my Panera, tears are streaming down my face as I wrestle through the complex emotions of stepping away from vocational ministry, recognizing the way that I have sacrificed my family's well-being for what I believed to be my calling and ministry as a pastor and preacher demanded, along with the repeated sacrifice of my family's financial and even emotional well-being. I come to grips with the knowledge that I have amputated a piece of my soul. I have cut music and my relationship with music from my life. Of the things that I have mentioned so far, my isolation from music may appear from the outside to be the least problematic of the mistakes that I have made. Yet, it is the unifying theme that has left me in a place of inauthenticity with myself, my faith, and my values. Music is the language of the soul, and I have rendered my soul mute. It's not obvious through our English translations of Scripture, and I'm no Hebrew scholar. Still, prior to the fall of mankind, the only conversations recorded in Scripture are presented in the form of music. Some theologians and scholars have even gone so far as to say that without the fall of mankind into sin, we would be living a musical in paradise with God. And that the imagery we see is that when all things are set right, we will return to the song of our soul. My isolation from music and song would appear from the outside as just being busy. But as I reflect on the loss of this portion of my soul, I recognize that it was systematic for the purpose of protecting myself from the pain of vulnerability with myself, with my God, and with fellow people in my life, particularly following the death of my son Philip nearing 6 years ago. Songs that exposed my pain to the air needed to be eradicated from my life lest I crumble. Leading up to Philip's prenatal diagnosis, birth, and death, the musical Hamilton was on near constant repeat in our cars. My wife, Christine, and I would switch discs 1 and 2 between our vehicles, and we got to go see the musical live in Chicago for our anniversary a couple of months prior to Philip's birth. Mirroring our life, Alexander Hamilton's son, Philip, also died. Once our Philip died, it became too difficult to listen to the second half of the musical, and the first half, which had brought so much joy to my life, faded to a daunting musical, pointing to the truth I could not face. The second song I built a wall of protection and isolation from was "It Is Well." The famous hymn written by Horatio Spafford was written on a ship after being told that they were in the location of the Atlantic Ocean where his family had recently drowned. This song became a heart cry and declaration of God's peace that God's peace was enough for us when our world had fallen apart. However, it became difficult to worship to that song publicly and even privately, when all we wanted to do was scream and ugly cry as we reached out for the peace of God, which seemed remarkably palpable considering the circumstances and so elusive in comparison to our felt needs. It doesn't help that nearly every church we worshiped at, visited, or I preached at played this song whenever we were there. It was the second Sunday preaching doing pulpit supply at the church I've served at for the last 5 years, where I had been so busy greeting people that I had missed noticing that the worship hymn leading into the preaching section of our service was none other than It Is Well. I dissolved in front of the congregations as my shoulders heaved so greatly I must have grown 3 inches and finally become 6 foot tall. Every time that song was selected again for worship, I began to amputate my pain and my worship so that I could survive long enough to preach with purpose. In closing the door to this song, I cut off yet another section of my soul for survival. Song number 3 definitely took the longest for me to recognize that I was even avoiding it, and that song is You Are My Sunshine. I sang the song to my oldest 2 boys at least once a week, often multiple times a day for the first couple years of their lives. Yet I remember my youngest son reaching at least 6 months old, and I wasn't able to remember singing You Are My Sunshine a single time to him. In fact, the last time I had remembered singing that song was holding Philip as he was dying. I may not know the day that the music died, but I know the pain that led me to murder, burn, and salt the music from my life. Which leads us back to my near dangerous weeping in the car this morning. A moment of spiritual clarity and insight. God showed me that I hadn't just stopped singing those songs. I had stopped singing any time it didn't feel mandated, and even in those times, I was concerned church members would catch that I wasn't participating in musical worship. I avoided song. I soothed myself with the excuse that I was a solo pastor, greeting people, directing the service, and often running the soundboard. But beneath my fear of opening up the floodgates in public and private was a conveniently ignored and underlying motive to let the stones cry out in my place. The God who saved me and I adore had been kicked out of the music room of my soul. It became the room I pretended did not exist since I never went in there, and I had not realized that I was declaring that space off limits to God. Not that I can stop him, as evidenced by my blubbering pilgrimage this morning. A couple of days ago, I peeked into the abandoned music room of my soul and was surprised to not find what I had presumed would be a pristine yet dusty room. In its place was destruction and the distant echo of a berserker's war cry. The music room of my soul needed to be rebuilt. While I have a very eclectic appreciation for music, my soul needed something specific for this season. I would have awoken the berserker's destruction with the kind of Christian worship that so many of our small to medium churches, that in my mind only technically even qualifies as a joyful noise. The music that often makes it to our Christian radio stations rightly honors God, while unfortunately in my experience underrepresenting how difficult it is to live in a broken and sinful world while keeping our eyes on Christ. So the best place I could think to turn was one of my brothers. One who has a deep passion for quality music, the desire to explore different topics, and a love for Jesus and me that would empower him to look beyond what was speaking to him in this season and identify what songs might speak to me. After 7 a.m. this morning, I had less than 30 minutes of sleep and decided to formulate a request for gritty music from a Christian worldview that would honor Christ without downplaying how much it sucks living in a broken world. I went back to bed, and after 2 hours of much needed sleep, I had 3 album song recommendations and an additional artist. I took my oldest son to summer reading tutoring, then clicked on the first link my brother had sent me and set out for a cold Dr. Pepper. Grace Price and Friends, artists I have never heard of, began playing. The first line, I broke my wrist punching through a wall in the parsonage. The congregation can't see me cry. I laughed at how relatable it was and thanked God that he had protected me from ever living on property the church owned. As my chest heaved and tears flooded, I watched for braking cars, grateful at the understanding that though these tears contained salt, they would begin clearing away of the wreckage that had once prevented healthy growth, creating a fountain of authentic worship in my once amputated soul. Thanks for coming along with me on this journey. God bless.